نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today this is lesson 7 in our series, and we're going to complete our discussion inshallah of the third principle. The third principle is related to unity behind those who are in authority over the affairs of the Muslims. This is a completion of the other type of unity, which is unity upon a sound creed, upon the foundations of the religion. And so that was the second principle, and the third principle is a completion of unity as a whole. So in the previous lesson we looked at the commentary of Sheikh Zayd rahimahullah, and from the affairs that we discussed in that lesson was that Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded obedience to Himself and to His Messenger unconditionally, and to the rulers of the Muslims on the condition that they order you with obedience. And the Shaykh also explained that he went on to discuss some technicalities about this issue, that this applies whether the ruler is ruling over the whole world, if that scenario existed, or whether it's in a particular region, or whether it's in it makes no difference. So as long as that ruler has authority over the general affairs of the people, then he's considered to be from the ulil amr, those in whose affair is the authority. And so obedience to them is from obedience to Allah and His Messenger, and it is what brings about unity and stability in the society. Sheikh then went on to also explain a narration from some of the Imams like Al-Fudayl bin Iyad and Imam Ahmad rahimahullah about how they would make their supplication for the ruler, that the ruler is rectified, corrected, becomes righteous, becomes pious, and that they would prefer making a supplication for the ruler rather than for themselves, even if they knew that it was a guaranteed supplication, a guaranteed answer to the supplication. Why? Because the benefit that would accrue if the ruler is rectified is far greater than the benefit that a person would gain for himself if his dua was for himself. So the Shaykh discussed that. He mentioned those narrations, and through that he intended to explain the greatness of the position of the rulers, because their rectification and their corruption and their rectification from corruption is something that benefits the entire society. So we're going to continue today inshallah discussing from the commentary of Sheikh Muhammad Aman al-Jami rahimahullah ta'ala, and he makes some similar points, and when we conclude this brief explanation we'll bring some other citations from Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, related to this issue of the rulers and how Ahlul Sunnah have a specific understanding with regard to this topic of the rulers and the tyranny of the rulers and how we ought to behave with respect to them. So Sheikh Muhammad Aman begins after mentioning the text of the principle inna min tamam al-ijtima' as-sam'a wa ta'a sam'u wa ta'a liman ta'ammara alina walau kana 'abdan habashiyan, that indeed from the perfection of unity is to hear and obey the one who has taken authority over us, even if he was an Abyssinian slave. فبين النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم هذا بيانا شافيا كافيا بوجوه من أنواع البيان شرعا وقدرا. the Prophet ﷺ, he explained this, meaning this principle, in a very clear, sufficient way through many different types of discourse, both legislatively, meaning in terms of what Allah has commanded in this regard, wa qadran, and also in terms of what has happened by way of qadr, meaning lessons that we take from what Allah has decreed in relation to this issue of rulers. ثم صار هذا الأصل لا يعرف عند أكثر من يدعي العلم فكيف العمل به. Then this principle became unknown to many of those who claim knowledge, so how then could it be acted upon? So the Shaykh says that previously we discussed in the second principle how Allah Azza wa Jal commanded unity in the religion and prohibited from splitting. And we already discussed the obligation of being united in the religion and the impermissibility of splitting. And that splitting is something that opposes the spirit of Islam and which opposes what the Prophet ﷺ, what he came with. And in this principle, the Shaykh, meaning Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad ibn Wahhab rahimahullah ta'ala, he says that from the perfection of unity, that same unity that was discussed in the second principle, is to hear and to obey, meaning to hear and obey to the one in authority. Because unity cannot be achieved, and nor can a sulta, which is authority, and nor can the religion itself remain upright except by way of hearing and obeying. And this is because the command to hear and obey the one who takes authority over us is from the foundational obligations in Islam. It's from the most foundational obligations in Islam. Even if this ruler was an Abyssinian slave, meaning, the Shaykh says, without looking at his status, his position, which race or ethnicity he is from, and which color he is, and whether he is just or whether he is unjust or sinful. And it is not a condition that the ruler that we are obliged to obey and listen to and to have this loyalty towards, that he should be just. Right? This is not a condition. Many of these people who oppose this principle, they try to falsely interpret the texts which command with obedience. They say that these texts only relate to a just ruler, a just or a legitimate ruler, and then they try to explain what legitimate means with incorrect conditions. So they say that these commands that you see in the Quran and the Sunnah, it only applies to a ruler who is actually just. And this is clearly false. It is plainly false, because the ahadith are very explicit in mentioning, as we mentioned in the previous lesson, that the Messenger of Allah explained to his companions what is going to happen in the future. He explained that there will be obviously splitting of the Muslim nation into various sects in terms of creeds and orientations. He explained that there will be a prophetic khilafah, followed by a rightly guided khilafah for 30 years, followed by kingship in which there will be mercy, there will be rahmah, followed by a kingship in which there will be a hardship, or it will be a biting type of kingship, followed by a tyrannical type of kingship. He explained all of these affairs, and he mentioned some of the traits and the qualities of the rulers that would appear. He mentioned from among them that they would not follow my sunnah, that they would not follow my guidance, that they would have the hearts of devils in the bodies of men, that they will confiscate your wealth and they will beat your back, and that they will demand their rights and they will not give you your rights, and that they will favor themselves financially, they will hoard wealth, and they will not fulfill your rights in terms of the financial responsibilities. All of these affairs, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he already explained very, very clearly in many, many authentic ahadith. So therefore, to specify this condition, as we find amongst the Khawarij and these groups in general, like Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hizb ut-Tahrir, and all these people like that. This is a false condition, and it's also a false interpretation of those verses in the Quran. Rather, what is correct is any person who man tawalla umur al-Muslimin, whoever takes over the affairs of the Muslims, whoever ends up in authority, irrespective of how he did it. In the books of Aqidah, such as Usoolussittah of Imam Ahmed and many other texts, the scholars clearly explain that irrespective of how a person came to power, whether he did through the people's agreement, or whether he came and fought with the sword and took power forcefully, irrespective of how he came to power, if that person is in control of the affairs of the Muslims, meaning he's assumed power and is now in charge of the affairs of the Muslims, then that person, it is obligatory to obey him in obedience to Allah and His Messenger. Meaning, in whatever he commands of goodness, of righteousness, right? Whatever entails obedience to Allah and His Messenger, it is obligatory to obey him. It is not a condition that he is just, that he is righteous, that he is free of sin, that he is this, that he is that, that he is this. Is not a condition, right? The condition is that if he is in charge of the, as Ibn Taymiyyah explains, that he's in his book Minhaj al-Sunnah, in the course of refuting many of the claims of the Rafida Shia, who deny the Khilafah of the likes of Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman, and he says, in refuting the allegation that they were not legitimate rulers, he basically says that a ruler and a Waliul Amr is someone who has Qudra and Sulta or Sultan and Tanfidh, which is that any ruler who basically holds power, he holds power, he also has authority, and he's also able to implement things upon the society. This person is in fact an actual ruler, whether you like it or not. And then he explains, for example, upon these conditions, we have to accept the rulership of every single ruler in the world. So the ruler of Persia is the ruler of Persia, whether you like it or not, because he has Qudra, he has Sultan, he has Tanfidh, he holds all of these powers in his hand. So Ibn Taymiyyah is basically saying to these arguments of the Rafida that Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and all the Khulafa, they actually held this power, right? Whether you like it or not. And just on this basis alone, they are actual rulers, right? Because the Rafida are trying to deny the rulership of these Khulafa, of these rulers. So here, when the Shaykh says that it is not a condition that a ruler has to be just, has to be righteous, this is true. This is what the Sunnah has come with. The Sunnah has come with that anyone who is in authority, meaning that he governs an affairs, the general affairs of the society, then he should be obeyed in that, and he should be obeyed in whatever he commands, as long as it is obedience to Allah and His Messenger. After this, the Shaykh then says, then he continues to say that anyone who basically takes over the affairs of the Muslims and the people are united behind him, then it is obligatory to hear and to obey him. So the point being, like for example, if someone said to you, who's the ruler of Morocco? Everybody knows who is the ruler of Morocco, right? And everybody knows that the ruler of Morocco and his government, they basically are in charge of the affairs of that country. They look after borders, the security. They look after issues of trade, commerce. They look after issues of, travel, things of that nature. They organize everything. So it's clear that that is the actual ruler of that country, right? Now, some of these groups, the Khawarij and other people, this is something that's well known. These groups, like the Khawarij and people like that, what they do is they say, first of all, that the ruler is illegitimate, and secondly, that they, or the emir, or the ruler, or the leader, whoever he is, that he is the legitimate leader or ruler to whom everybody else should pledge allegiance to. Right? And this is from their stupidity. And if you ask yourself, what authority does this individual have? Right? Some group existing in that country, he's calling people to pledge allegiance to himself, right? And he's in a clandestine, secret way, he's trying to work against the government and the ruler to topple them, right? With whatever means he has. Think about it. The Ulil Amr, the Waliul Amr, this is why this name, this label has been specifically used, the Waliul Amr, or the Ulil Amr, those who are in authority. It means those who have qudra, sultan, and the power of implementing the laws over the people. That is what constitutes the actual ruler who is to be obeyed. So how can these people, first of all, you don't even know who they are. Who is this so-called Amir of this group? Right? You have so many of them, these secretive groups claiming to have a leader who they give the pledge of allegiance to, a small group. What authority do they have in the land? Do they control commerce? Do they control security? Do they control the road regulations? What do they control? Nothing. They control nothing. Absolutely nothing. They have no power whatsoever. How can they consider themselves to be legitimate authorities? This is plain falsehood. So we have to understand the words used in the Quran and the Sunnah, the Ulil Amr, who are the ones who are in authority, what this entails, and the wisdom of the Sharia in making obedience to them obligatory in whatever entails goodness. There are great wisdoms for this. It is to maintain the stability of the society. It is to maintain the greater good. It is to bear the lesser of two evils. Right? All of these principles of the Sharia, their considerations within this particular principle. After this, the author, when he said that the Prophet ﷺ has explained this in a very clear, sufficient manner, using various types of explanations, shar'an wa qadaran, both legislatively and in terms of decree. The Shaykh explains this statement by saying that the Prophet ﷺ explained this issue in a very clear, open way, using so many different types of explanations, and doing this in terms of either legislation, meaning what Allah Himself has commanded with respect to this principle, and also in terms of what Allah has decreed by way of His your decrees, meaning things that we can take lessons from in history, what have happened by way of Allah's qadar. To illustrate, for example, I give in the previous lesson, I mentioned Egypt, for example, the revolution in Egypt, and how people had hoped that they had not rebelled and revolted, because they were better off in the era of the previous ruler, Hosni Mubarak, than they are in this turmoil that came about after these revolutions. This is now an example from qadar, from the decrees of Allah Azza wa Jal, that that if you adhere to this principle and you have patience and you repent to Allah, sooner or later the affair will resolve. Another example could be Libya, for example, when the people, obviously they were instigated from outside to rebel against Gaddafi, and of course the scholars consider Gaddafi to be a disbeliever. Nevertheless, the principle still applies that even if the ruler is a disbeliever and revolting is going to bring about more harm, then you don't revolt. And if those people had patience, Gaddafi would have died, he would have passed away. his sons would have taken power. His sons were not really like his father. They would have been more amenable to reforms. They would have changed things. They would, they would have controlled the wealth of that nation, because Libya was a very, very wealthy country, extremely wealthy country, and that's why these, vultures and hyenas from outside these nations, they wanted to plunder that country. So when the people revolted, they just simply gave a chance to all of these outside vultures and hyenas to come and to try to loot that nation. Right? Now, this is another example from qadr, from what Allah has decreed, from His decrees to happen and to occur, from which we can take lessons from. So the point being, when he says that the Prophet ﷺ has explained this بِوُجُوهٍ مِّنْ أَنْوَاءِ الْبَيَانِ شَرْعًا وَقَدَرًا, that this principle has been explained legislatively, meaning in terms of what we have been commanded by the Sharia to hear and to obey, those in authority, and qadran, and in terms of what Allah has decreed to happen, of these affairs in history where people rebel against the rulers prematurely. Like, for example, many people revolted against, in the time of Al-Hasan al-Basri, they revolted against Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf, who was a tyrannical ruler, who appeared in the time of the companions. And some youth came about and they wanted to revolt against him, and they were prohibited from doing so by the Tabi'een like Al-Hasan al-Basri, but they didn't listen. And so this ruler, he clamped down upon them and slaughtered them all, and it didn't really help the situation at all. Because when you fight against the ruler, he's more determined to enforce his power, and he'll use his army and everything else, and he'll stamp down, even with even more force. So the point being that shar'an, by way of the commands in the Sharia, and qadaran, by way of what Allah has decreed, this principle has been made very, very, very clear. Very, very clear. And this is why you will see that in the Western nations you don't see revolutions anymore, because they realize what a destructive effect revolutions have upon whole societies. Right? They don't allow revolutions to take place in these Western nations like they themselves promote and instigate in Muslim countries. Right? They promote these, this discord and rebellion and revolution, because it's a means to destabilize the society, and then they come in like vultures and hyenas to try to steal the resources. So if only people adhered to this principle, then there wouldn't be all of this corruption and fasad in these lands. So the Shaykh then goes on to explain a principle that we mentioned at the beginning. He says, this is related to qadr. He says, whatever Allah has legislated and commanded in terms of the religion, it is not necessary that it actually occurs. Right? So, for example, Allah has commanded all of the people of the earth to have iman, to be believers. But not all of the people have believed. So in other words, not everything that Allah legislates and desires that He wants to happen, does it actually happen. Right? This is His legislative will. This is His will which comprises the things that He likes and is pleased with. He commands tawheed. He commands sincerity. He commands establishing the prayer. He commands, giving the zakah and so on and so forth. All these things which He desires and wants from His servants. But not everybody fulfills this and abides this. This shows that there are those things which Allah wants to happen and desires to happen and loves them, such as tawheed, ikhlas, as-salah, as-zakah, and so on and so forth, and obedience to His messengers. However, there are those things which Allah wills from His universal will. And whenever He wills those things, they will definitely happen. So for example, if Allah wills the disbelief of a person, that will definitely happen. Why? Because this will is now related to what actually happens in his creation. It's different to his will, which is tied to his love. Right? There are some things which Allah loves and He legislates them and wants them to happen. But for a wisdom, He might will that a person does not abide by those things. Right? So we must distinguish between these two types of will. There is a type of will which if Allah wills it, it will definitely occur. Right? If Allah wills a leaf to drop, if Allah wills a hurricane to occur, if Allah wills a person to die, if Allah wills a person to be born, if Allah wills a person to be a disbeliever or to be a believer, right? Or to turn his heart in a certain way, that will definitely happen. Right? So this is the will, the universal will, the will that relates to his creation. And then we also have the will that relates to what he wants and likes and is pleased with and is loved and he loves, and what he wants from his servants for their benefit. So this now relates to what he legislates. So we make a distinction between Allah's legislative will and his creational will. We have to make this distinction because if we don't, what is the implication? The implication is that Allah loves everything which happens. Right? If you do not distinguish between these two types of will, the implication would be that Allah loves everything which He decrees to happen, which means Allah loves that a person commits fornication. Allah loves that a person is upon disbelief or commits shirk. Allah loves that a person commits oppression. This is not true. Allah dislikes disbelief and sin and disobedience. Allah dislikes these affairs. Right? So which means that Allah is not pleased with everything that He decrees. But He decrees those things for our wisdom. So we must distinguish between these two types of will. And so this is clear as well in this principle. Allah has legislated and commanded that we obey those in authority. However, there are many people such as the Khawarij, such as the Mu'tazila, and such as these Jama'at, they do not do so. They do not do so. And Allah willed upon them this misguidance for whatever wisdoms, for particular wisdoms, some of which we know, some of which we do not know. So the Shaykh says there's a difference between al-irada al-shar'iyyah, the legislative will, which is tied to Allah's love, and al-irada al-kawniyyah, which is the creational will, which is the will that governs whatever happens in His creation. So, by way of Allah's creational will, Allah wills everything. He wills the iman of a person and the disbelief of another person, the obedience of a person and the disobedience of another person, goodness and evil. All of these things, they emanate from Allah's creational will, because nothing happens except what He wills. So it is a mistake and an error to believe that Allah only desires and intends goodness in His creation. Right? This is a general statement which is incorrect. If you mean by this that Allah by this you mean Allah's legislation through which He wants goodness for His servants, then this is correct. But if you leave this open and general, that everything that Allah, wants and desires is good, this is not correct, because it would mean, as we said, all the sins, all the disobedience, all the disbelief, all the shirk, it would imply that all of this is goodness which Allah has decreed. So this is not correct. So after making this point, the Shaykh then goes on to the final statement made in the principle, ثم صار هذا الأصل لا يعرف عند أكثر من يدعي العلم فكيف العمل به. Then this principle became such that it became unknown to most people, so how then could it be acted upon? The Shaykh says, if the knowledge of this principle is itself lost, then to act upon it is even more worthy of being lost, therefore. And the Shaykh says that some people believe that when a ruler is an alim, and he is just, then it is obligatory to obey him. And the Shaykh says this is not correct. This is from the common misconceptions which are spread today amongst the people. And any person who Allah has given sound intellect and who sees affairs as they truly are, and who has knowledge of history, and who has knowledge of the way of our righteous Salaf, and who has knowledge of the religion, he will know completely and perfectly that hearing and obeying and giving the pledge of allegiance is an absolute, unqualified obligation. Whether the ruler is adil, just, or fajir, sinful, whether he is mu'thir or munfiq. Mu'thir means a person who hoards all of the wealth for himself and he looks after his own interests, right? Or whether he is munfiq, whether he spends upon the people, whether he is muhsin or whether he is musi', whether he is a person who does goodness or whether he a person who commits evil. Irrespective of any of these affairs, so long as that ruler does not openly manifest clear disbelief, al-kufr al-bawah, open clear disbelief, then it is obligatory to hear and to obey him. Whether he's righteous, sinful, spends upon the people or withholds from the people, a doer of good, a doer of evil, all of that is irrelevant. The only condition, the exception here is when plain, clear, manifest disbelief is observed from him. What does this mean? What does this physically or practically mean? The Shaykh goes on to explain. The meaning of clear, open disbelief is one which he openly announces and he openly invites to, and which itself is very, very clear and unambiguous. For example, he calls the people openly to abandon the prayer. He says, you no longer need to pray. Stop praying. This now is open, clear, manifest disbelief. Right? He no longer establishes the prayer. He prohibits the people from prayer. He wants the masajid doors to be closed. Stop praying. This is clear, manifest disbelief. Meaning it's something open that everybody can see. Everybody, it's also a matter which in itself is clear as well. It's not some hidden, subtle, intricate type of issue, whose disbelief is not clear. It's something that's open and manifest and clear in the public eye, right? This is how the scholars explain this. He says, likewise, if he ordered his society to abandon fasting, the month of Ramadan, and his reason is, look, I don't want you to fast anymore. It's prohibited for you to fast. Why? Because you become weak. And when you become weak, the production, the economy suffers. So I don't want you to fast anymore. And he stops them from doing so. And this is open, clear, manifest disbelief. He's openly inviting people and manifesting something which is disbelief. And likewise, the Shaykh goes on to give a third example. If he said that the Shariatul Islamiyya, the Islamic legislation, is not suitable for the current times or for the present times, and maybe it was for the past, but not anymore, and we have to import these secular laws either from outside or whether we invent them ourselves. And he says that the Sharia is dry and it doesn't really rectify and things of that nature. We want laws which are in accord with the people's aspirations and desires. If a person comes out and openly he expresses and he says the likes of this speech, then this person, فَهَذَا أَعْلَنَ كُفْرَهُ, this person has openly announced his disbelief. And so the Shaykh is saying this is the meaning of what is meant by al-kufr al-bawah. Right? It is open, clear, plain, manifest disbelief which everybody knows. There's no ambiguity, there's no confusion, there's no ta'wil involved, things of that nature. Right? So this is different. For example, historically, there were rulers who basically held the belief many of the rulers who are upon the Ash'ari Creed. The Ash'ari Creed, they deny that Allah is above His throne. They claim that the Quran is created. This Arabic Quran that we recite, that it is created. And they have many other doctrines which entail rejection of what is in the Quran and the Sunnah. But these doctrines, they have arrived at these doctrines by way of faulty interpretation, misunderstanding of the texts, right? They have shubuhat, they have misconceptions, and they don't know that what they are believing is actual disbelief, right? So that's why the scholars never made takfir against the likes of these rulers or these people, because here there is ta'wil involved. Ta'wil meaning that there's some sort of faulty interpretation involved. They have misunderstanding of the texts, and they interpret the texts, and so those doubts would need to be removed for them to clearly understand that what they're believing is wrong, right? So the reason why I'm giving these examples here is to make it clear what is meant by al-kufr al-bawah, open, clear, manifest disbelief, right? In the case of the rulers, it is something that has to be, first of all, done openly. It is something that in itself is very clear. Clearly it is kufr. There's no ambiguity in its disbelief, and it is something that's the ruler does openly in the public eye, and for which we have clear evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah. So this is what removes the obligation of obeying him in whatever is al-ma'ruf, whatever is good, right? So that obedience then stops. So the Shaykh says, as long as the ruler has not reached this position or this status or this level, then it is obligatory to hear and to obey him, right? So from this we can now understand that many of the arguments used by many of these groups, like the Khawarij and these political groups, they bring these arguments that do not enter into clear manifest disbelief. For example, they will say, often they will try to use the argument that the ruler is unjust. He's a zalim. He's unjust to his subjects. And because he's unjust, it means he's not implementing the laws, right? Therefore, he's a disbeliever. This is false. This is not correct. A ruler does not become disbeliever because he does not abide by justice. Or they will say, for example, that the ruler made a peace treaty. He made a peace treaty with, hostile nations, like it could be America or the British or the whatever else. This means that he's sold the religion out to them. This again is false. This itself does not constitute disbelief, because to make peace treaties, to make alliances is perfectly permissible in Islam. Even if the ruler is wrong, even if, let's say, pragmatically he is wrong in making that treaty or the alliance, that still doesn't entail that he's a disbeliever. Because in terms of political affairs, for the interests of the state, to make a peace treaty, to make an alliance, these are perfectly permissible in the Sharia as part of the politics, the politics and the means of governing. Likewise, if he was to give gifts to non-Muslim rulers or non-Muslim nations, to give them, for example, relief or aid, donations because they had a disaster, or to give gifts to their ruler, all of this does not entail disbelief either, because sometimes it is permitted in the Sharia, if you fear the evil of a people or a nation, then you can behave with them diplomatically, with diplomatic ties, and to behave with them in a, you have this mudarat, you have this tactful way of dealing with friends and foes, right? By keeping warm relations with them. This is all perfectly permissible. You can give them gifts, you can have, right? So what happens is that these people, these Khawarij or these misguided people who don't understand these affairs, they see the rulers having, for example, trade relationships, having friendships, having peace treaties. Even if they were wrong in the way that they are doing those things, that still does not make them disbelievers, right? It doesn't make them to be disbelievers. And it doesn't mean in every instance that they are making wala, they are making loyalty for the sake of the religion of those disbelievers, right? All of these ideas coming from these Khawarij used to make takfir of the rulers, all of this comes from their own ignorance. They are ignorant people and they don't understand these affairs. So the Shaykh says, as long as the ruler has not reached this level of clear, open, plain, manifest disbelief, then it is obligatory to hear and to obey him. Shaykh then goes on to give examples from history in the time of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. He said there were kings and rulers, there was khulafa and muluk who were ja'ireen, zalimin. They were oppressive and tyrannical, like Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf. He was a tyrannical ruler, and they used to pray behind him. They didn't revolt against him. And as long as he did not command disobedience, then they obeyed him in those affairs. And this is how the righteous Salaf, this is how they were. They adhered to this principle. The Shaykh goes on to mention a statement from Imam Malik bin Anas rahimahullah ta'ala, saying, لا يصلح آخر هذه الأمة إلا بما صلح به أولها. The latter part of this nation will not be rectified except what rectified the earlier part of this nation. Meaning that the affairs of the Muslims today will not be rectified except what rectified the very first Muslims. And what rectified them, part and parcel of what rectified them, was that they remained united and they did not split and they did not revolt against their rulers. So basically they maintained stability and they maintained unity. The Shaykh goes on to explain that this revolt or this rebellion can have numerous manifestations. It doesn't always have to be physical. A rebellion isn't just physical. So he says, وَالْخُرُوجِ لَا يَأْنِ دَائِمًا الْخُرُوجِ بِالصَّلَاحِ. It doesn't always mean revolting with weapons. Rather, التمرد يعتبر خروجا على السلطان. For example, to التمرد is to show disobedience and not to obey. This itself is considered to be a revolting against the ruler. For example, revolting against some of his commands. This is considered to be revolting against the ruler. So for example, let's say for the purpose of public safety, there's a highway code, for example, that ensures the safety of people, pedestrians, drivers, and you obstinately refuse to abide by those laws and those rules, putting people at risk, you are making khuruj. You are revolting and rebelling against the authority. So it doesn't always have to be that you take a weapon and you take up arms and you physically assault the ruler. It can take place in numerous different ways. And one of those ways is to oppose his command, oppose those guidelines or regulations which are there to protect the beneficial interests of the people. The Shaykh says that this is something that many of those who ascribe to knowledge have forgotten or are ignorant of. So if this is with respect to those who ascribe to knowledge, how then about those who don't have any knowledge at all of the religion? And likewise also the Salaf, they considered to vocally announce the faults and to proclaim the faults of the ruler openly and publicly and to spread them amongst the people, to incite them, right? This also is considered to be khuruj. It's considered to be rebellion and revolt. Shaykh says that after mentioning all of this is from ignorance, a person must have knowledge, and without knowledge, how is a person supposed to act? And likewise, it is not sufficient just to have knowledge and just to know the texts. Rather, a person must have the right understanding of these texts. And that understanding is the understanding of the righteous Salaf. the understanding of the Salaf, that we must return back to their understanding if we want to be upon correct guidance. This is where we end with the commentary of the Shaykh, rahimahullah. And so to make sure that we've understood this principle well, we're going to finish, inshallah, seal this third principle with some very insightful statements from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah and Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, which will allow us to see the ignorance and the misguidance of many of these groups who are present today, who believe, or who want to make people believe, that all of the ills and the harms and the destruction in the ummah has come by way of the rulers. Right? They want to pinpoint the rulers and blame them for all of the woes of the Muslim ummah, and then they want to make it appear as if we didn't have these rulers and we had a khilafah, and we work to a khilafah, or this general idea that this is what is going to solve the problem. Right? So all of this is from their ignorance, and we'll see this very clearly when we look at these statements from Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah. So what these statements will explain to us, they will explain to us how and why tyrannical rulers appear, and why Allah Azza wa Jal puts them in authority over the people. And when you reflect upon these words, you will be able to better diagnose a society or a nation. So let's go into one of these statements from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah. This statement is found in his book Miftah Dar as-Sa'ada in the second volume, page 177 onwards. He says, and reflect. He's asking us to reflect in the wisdom of Allah in making the kings of the servants and their leaders and their rulers to be of the same species as the actions of the servants. What does this mean? This means that whatever types of actions are committed by the society, whatever actions the society is committing, then those actions will translate into the ruler. The ruler will be an expression of the actual actions being committed in that society. It is from Allah's wisdom to make the ruler to be an expression of those very same actions. Ibn al-Qayyim continues, rather it is as if their actions, the actions of the people, became manifest in the appearance of their rulers and kings. If they remain upright, meaning the subjects, then their kings will remain upright. And if they turn away from uprightness, then the kings too will turn away from uprightness. Then he goes on to clarify what this means. And if they, meaning the servants, oppress each other, then their kings and rulers will oppress them. Right, so think about this now. The oppression of a ruler over his subjects is simply an expression or a consequence of the subjects oppressing themselves. Right, so when the subjects start oppressing themselves, that will eventually translate into the ruler oppressing the society. Right, this is from the wisdom and justice of Allah Azza wa Jal, that this is what happens in His creation. And if plotting and deception appears from them, their rulers will be made to behave likewise towards them. So now this means, if we in the society as individuals, we start being conniving and plotting and deceiving one another, that this is what starts appearing in the society in terms of the way we behave with each other, then Allah Azza wa Jal will make the rulers to behave likewise with his subjects as a whole. And if they, meaning the servants, withhold the rights of Allah that are between themselves and become miserly with respect to them, then their kings and their rulers will withhold the rights that they, the servants, have upon them, and those kings and rulers will become miserly with respect to them. So now if we as individuals, we do not fulfill the rights that we have towards each other, this will then translate and be expressed in the ruler not fulfilling the rights that the servants have upon him. And if they, meaning the subjects, take from the one who is considered weak what they do not deserve to take from him in their dealings, then the kings will take from them, meaning all of the servants, what they do not deserve to take from them, and will inflict them with taxes. What does this mean now? This means that now in the ordinary dealings between individual members in the society, if, for example, a person sees another person who is a bit naive and weak, and so he pulls a fast one on him and cheats him out of his wealth, right? Basically takes from him what he shouldn't really be taking, but because he's in a position of strength, and that weak one, he's embezzled some money from him, or he's cheated him, or he's oppressed him and taken something from him. When this starts happening among the subjects, then this will translate into the ruler. He will then do the same with the society as a whole, right? And he will take from them what he shouldn't really be taken from them. So now he will impose taxes upon the people, and maybe the prices of commodities and goods will be raised, right? Where's all this coming from? This is coming from the actions of the servants themselves. This is where it begins. And everything that they, the servants, take away from the weak person unjustly, the kings will take away from them with force and with power. So their actions, meaning the actions of the servants, become manifest in their actions, meaning the actions of the kings and the rulers. And it is from the divine wisdom that the evildoers and the sinners are made to be ruled over. And it is not from the divine wisdom that the evildoers and the sinners are made to be ruled over by anyone except by one who is of their like. Right? Meaning that Allah Azza wa Jal does not ever put a ruler over a people except that the people are deserving of him. So for example, who ruled over the Sahaba radiallahu anhum? It was the Prophet ﷺ, and then Abu Bakr, and then Umar, right? In fact, there's a report in the time of Ali radiallahu anhu that some people were complaining about his rule, and he basically said that that if you want us to behave to rule over you with the likes of Abu Bakr and Umar, then behave like those whom they ruled over. Right? So here, this principle that it is not from Allah's wisdom that the sinners and evildoers should be ruled over except by one who is of their like. So he continues, and when the first band of Islam, they were the best of generations and the most pious of them, then their rulers were likewise. And when they became corrupt, the rulers were made to be corrupt over them. Thus the wisdom of Allah refuses that the likes of Muawiyah and Umar bin Abdul Aziz are put in authority over us in the likes of these times. And Ibn al-Qayyim is speaking in his time 7 centuries ago. Let alone the likes of Abu Bakr and Umar. Rather, our rulers are in accordance with our nature, and the rulers of those before us were in accordance with their nature. So this is just one of numerous statements that we can bring. There's another statement, a very nice statement as well, and this is in his book Zad al-Ma'ad, and he says, for Allah the Sublime, with his wisdom and adl. He makes the consequences of the actions of the servants to appear to them in forms, in surah, in forms that are appropriate to their own actions. So what Ibn al-Qayyim is going to explain, he's saying that whatever actions the servants perform, they will then appear in the form of physical forms and manifestations that everybody can see. They will translate into those physical forms. So he says, so sometimes it is in the form of a drought or the barrenness of a land. So in other words, the crops fail to appear. Other times it is by way of an enemy. Other times by way of tyrannical rulers. Other times by way of general diseases which spread. Other times it is by way of anxiety and grief and worry that reside in their souls and do not leave them. Other times it is by preventing blessings from the sky and the earth from them. Other times it is by unleashing the devils upon them to incite them to the causes of their destruction, so that his word can be established upon them, and so that each of them arrives at the outcome destined for him. The intelligent person, he looks at all of these affairs with basira, with insight, and he witnesses all of this, and when he sees all of this happening, he sees these instances of Allah's justice and wisdom taking place. So in other words, what he's saying here is that all of these things that you see that afflict societies, whether it is droughts or famines, economic hardships, diseases which spread, or just general anxiety and grief and worrying about, for example, your sustenance, worrying about the fear, physical safety, all of these things, they come from some place, and that some place is the actual actions of the servants. And these are just the physical appearances, the physical manifestations that we are seeing, right, of the consequences of the evil deeds of the people. And one of those consequences is tyrannical rulers. In fact, this is made very, very clear in one of the authentic ahadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he said that never do the people cheat in the weights and measures. Never do the people cheat in the weights and measures, except that they are taken by years of hardship. إِلَّا أُخِذُوا بِالسِّنِينَ وَشِدَّةِ الْمَؤُونَةِ وَجَوْرِ السُّلْطَانِ عَلَيْهِمْ. Except that they are taken by years of hardship, scarcity of resources, and the tyranny of the ruler upon them. So this hadith makes it very, very clear how and why are people taken by the tyranny of the ruler. It is because in their personal dealings with each other, they start cheating in the weights and measures. Right? So when this appears in a society that they are cheating each other in weights and measures, this will eventually translate into a ruler who will tyrannize and oppress them as a whole. Right? So these are things that this is knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal has given us with respect to how His creation operates. We cannot fathom this knowledge. We could not work out this knowledge. This is revealed knowledge which tells us how Allah's creation works. Right? And because the Sharia has come with these affairs and made them very, very, very clear, then when we look at a society and we try to analyze what's wrong and what's happening in this society, why is there corruption in this government? Why are the people being embezzled of their wealth in this country? Why is there not much infrastructure, in this country? Where's all the wealth going? It's been looted, right? There's the way of the Khawarij, the way of Jahl, the way of Hawa, which is just to point out the rulers and say it is the rulers, they are disbelievers, they are tyrannical, they are oppressive, they are unjust, they are this, and then call the people to revolt against the rulers. All right? And so where that will lead to an even worse situation than the one that they are currently in. Why? Because they are trying to cure something upon their own ignorance and misguidance. Whereas when we start understanding that there's more to the picture than just the ruler involved, there's something much wider taking place, then we will start seeing the true and real causes of rectification for that society. And I can give you, although we can give many countries as an example, we can take, in fact, the same scenario exists in pretty much, many Muslim countries. But let's take Pakistan as an example. In Pakistan, many people are upon Sufism and Shiism, and grave worship and tomb worship is rampant in many parts of the country. Right? People travel to worship graves, they worship the saints, they call upon them. Right? This is plain, clear, manifest shirk in a society. Right? And if you look at what this hadith mentioned, that if you just start cheating in weights and measures, then Allah will bring the tyranny of the ruler upon that nation. This is just cheating in weights and measures. How about shirk with the Lord of the worlds? Right? So if you look at, just some of the things that used to happen in that society, in the Pakistani society, because the previous rulers, they used to embezzle wealth, take billions out of the country, move the funds to other countries like Dubai and European places. Right? There would be infrastructure projects that were there to build roads, and all the money would be given to companies that they owned, and they'd steal the money, not even deliver the projects. Right? And there's all sorts of economic hardships, there's all sorts of crime taking place, people being robbed in the houses, and generally not a safe place. Right? Karachi, was the central place of crime and killing and murder and all sorts of things. So, and a lot of corruption, So, a person with a Khariji mentality would think, right, we need to remove these rulers, or he will start thinking, right, this is why we need a khilafah. Right? And so their solution seems to be, just replace these ones and we'll go on top. Right? But underneath, the people are exactly the same. They haven't changed. Right? This is never going to work. This top-down approach, which is the way of the communists, Marxists, socialists, right? This is all from European Western philosophy, right? What they did in Europe in the 19th century. This is not how rectification takes place. According to the way of the prophets and messengers. This is not how rectification takes place. Rectification takes place according to the methodology of the prophets. And it begins by rectifying the self, it begins by rectifying the society, making them come to understand the tawheed of the messengers, and to obey Allah, to obey His messenger, and to, there's a whole process involved. It's not just the rulers and that's it. Because when you take this approach of just focusing on the rulers, what you are going to do inevitably is you're going to take an already corrupt situation and make it even more corrupt, first of all. And then secondly, you are going to give opportunities to outside disbelieving nations who operate like vultures and hyenas to come in and to take advantage of that turmoil to then further their own interests and their agendas. And this is very, very, very clear to see even in right now what's taking place right now. Right, in some of these countries where these revolutions, like in Libya and Syria and other places, even if the rulers of those countries are disbelievers, you can even see the same things happening there. That even though they were disbelievers, it would have been better for them not to revolt, right, than to actually revolt and to suffer what they are suffering from now. So anyway, we'll finish with one more statement from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, and he says, indeed, the affair of rule being destined for the kings and their deputies from the rulers, judges and leaders is not due to the deficiency in them alone, but due to the deficiency in both the shepherd and the flock together. And he mentions a statement, as for you yourself, as you yourselves behave, you will be ruled over in a like manner. And Allah the Exalted has said in the Quran, He mentions an ayah in the Quran, وَكَذَلِكَ نُوَلِّي بَعْدَ الظَّالِمِينَ بَعْدَ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. Thus do we turn the oppressors against each other on account of what they used to earn. And Abu Bakr Muhammad at-Turtushi said, I never ceased hearing the people saying, your actions are your workers. As you yourselves behave, you will be ruled over in a like manner. So this scholar is saying, I never understood what the people meant by this until I grasped this meaning from the Quran. Allah the Exalted said, and he mentioned this verse, thus do we turn some of the oppressors against others on account of the deeds that they earn. And it used to be said, whatever you show rejection against in your time, then it is your own deed that has corrupted that for you. And Abd al-Malik bin Marwan said, O subjects, you have not dealt justly with us. You want from us the seerah, the way, the behavior of Abu Bakr and Umar, but you do not yourselves behave with respect to us or yourselves with their behavior. Right? So, this statement Ibn Taymiyyah is simply saying that the nature of the rulers is determined by the flock, by the subjects. And if the rulers are oppressing the subjects, this is simply an instance of the verse in the Quran in which Allah says, thus do we turn the oppressors, some of them, against the others. Right? So the oppressors in the society, Allah is just simply turning the rulers who are oppressors against those oppressors who are in the society. So with these statements, we should have a clearer and better understanding of the greatness of this principle, this third principle, and the wisdom, the great and mighty wisdom of this principle. And we should know it both shar'an and qadran. We both know it both in terms of the texts that we've been looking at in this principle, which command obedience, and also in terms of qadr, in terms of the examples that have been given through history. The example of Hajjaj bin Yusuf, the example throughout the whole of history until the modern era where we can clearly see that violating this principle leads to the destruction of the servant and the land. And so this principle is what makes the people of the Sunnah to be unique. It is one of the clear distinguishing signs of the person of the Sunnah. Any person that you see on social media, on the tube, going out there, speaking against the rulers, criticizing them, right? This person is not a Sunni. He's not a person who venerates the Sunnah, right? You know that automatically. And this is not to say that it doesn't mean that that we agree with all of the mistakes of the rulers, or if they commit any sin, or if they commit any tyranny, or if they, does not mean that we are accepting and accommodating of those. Rather, our hearts have to show, they make inkar of that evil. Our hearts do. We dislike that evil, right? And we do not accept these actions that are done, right? But just because we follow the Sunnah and we do not instigate people against governments and rulers, does not mean that we are agreeing with what they are doing. Our hearts show rejection against these evils of whether it be music, whether it be things which take place or have been taking place. We don't accept these affairs. But that does not mean that. But the distinction between a person of the Sunnah and a person of Bid'ah is to see how does he behave with this issue, in this issue of the rulers. So any person you see, like many of these people do on social media and the tube, they come out and they basically start criticizing and reviling and speaking evil words about some of the rulers. This shows these people have not understood the Sunnah. They are not upon the way of the Salaf. They are not upon the Sunnah. They are upon misguidance in what they are doing. So we shouldn't be confused about this issue. So inshallah that will be sufficient for this ending this principle and this lesson. In the next lesson, inshallah ta'ala, we'll begin the fourth principle. And the fourth principle is a great principle in distinguishing between the people of knowledge from those who claim to be from them but are not actually from them. In other words, what is a genuine true scholar and what is a pretender to knowledge. Right? So the fourth principle relates to that, and inshallah we'll discuss that in the next lesson. With that, we close our lesson today. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.